Now, in health and technology news, which are merging more and more, a pill that treats and tells. Better put, a tattletale pill. And these, you've probably heard about these. They've been reported on since at least January. Edible microchips to alert mobile phones of pills not taken. Digital digestible pills that will allow doctors to monitor your medication use. And now they're pushing for them more than ever. Doctors are saying they want their patients to be forced to take these. Doctors who've already been brainwashed and financially bought off by the big pharmaceutical companies are now being encouraged for that little idea of compliance, to make sure their patients aren't just getting the diagnosis and paying the money for the pills, but that they're actually taking them and having their physiology and brain waves rewritten by these wonderful little pills they have. At any rate, if you're having trouble remembering whether you took your pills on time, your medicine may soon have the answer for you. Pills from everything from the common cold to diabetes or cancer can be embedded with tiny ingestible chips that track whether a patient is taking their medication on time. And it goes on to detail the California-based Proteus digital health firm. And they say, well, some patients may not like being tracked. Some patients may think it's Big Brother, but it's a good idea, and it doesn't mean you're a bad patient. It's just that we want to have accurate data and make sure you're fully medicated, just like one flew over the cuckoo's nest. And I've got a separate ad for a different firm. I hope you can pick this up on the document cam. This is from the Daysalt Systems, and they've got a similar nanotech pill that's going to help keep track of your medication. And it says, in the future, if we want to avoid surgery, can we swallow a robot? And this, again, is stuff that Ray Kurzweil and others talked about, where nanobots are going to be injected into our body. They're going to take care of the medical aspects. Natural cures, of course, will long since be banned by the time that we see these nanobots taking over and really telling us what's best. But what I found in this article that was the most interesting is this is yet another cockamamie idea promoted and funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, now by far the largest philanthropy interest in the world. The Rockefeller Foundation, among others, merged most of their main issues with the Gates Foundation, who focus exclusively, well, I shouldn't say exclusively, they focus predominantly on vaccines around the globe and GMO foods and all kinds of other things that are really strange ideas, like clouding the earth with barium and sulfur particles to change our weather patterns. And by the way, he owns hurricane steering technology. Huge conflicts of interest. Nobody seems willing to hold these so-called philanthropy foundations to account because they have a friendly face, Bill and Melinda Gates in a blue sweater. And they've given money to Proteus, and they've worked with the other nanotech and technology firms, the big pharma firms, the firms in China and Japan, it tells us, the Swiss firm Novartis. All these big pharma entities are being told to adopt and push this technology, a digital pill, the beginning of introducing RFID chips into our body to track what's going on in there. And that's all just a lead up for what you know has been coming, what you know has been on the agenda for decades, the implantable permanent RFID chip they hope they could put under the skin in your hand or maybe somewhere else on the body. But meanwhile, the Gates Foundation hasn't stopped there. They're in the news for other items today, other equally dangerous, perhaps more dangerous proposals. They're funding a variety of proposals listed here on their website, among them an anti-vaccine surveillance and alert system to counter disinformation, supposedly, disinformation, according to them, about vaccines and their well-known dangers, and to alert authorities that they need to basically monitor people putting out this information. But even more radical, the Bill Gates Foundation is funding and developing and preparing to deploy unmanned aerial vehicles to take vaccines to your home if you're in a rural area. So those who don't comply, who don't volunteer for what they consider mandatory vaccines, will get little home visits from robots. So it's not just the robots and the pills you take, it's going to be the drones showing up your house literally with vaccines, and who knows how things go from there. But they're planning to try to push for universal vaccine adoption, and as usual, they have another dozen or so vaccine-related proposals as they try to pursue total world by vaccination. Who nominated this guy to run the world? Well, his money did. The money he stole from you through his dominance in Microsoft. But what's important about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is their little proposals, their little grants get adopted by individual nations, and they fund maybe the first round just to get the doors open. Then they saddle those nations with a huge burden and cost of running those vaccine programs. There's a big controversy in places like India and Pakistan where A, they're suspicious of all this Western intervention, and B, you have 47,000 cases of polio admittedly caused by the oral polio vaccines. That's just a taste of the problems that this maniacal mad scientist is creating across the earth. As I might mention, he continues to push GMOs everywhere. Remember his crazy proposal to spend more than $1 million developing the galvanic mood bracelets that he would make students and teachers wear in the classroom to try to monitor whether or not they're paying attention to the indoctrination lesson handed down from the global government? Well, that's just the kind of big technocratic stuff they want to run our lives with. This is the stuff the classic socialists who have taken over this world through the collectivist model have been talking about since the early 1900s. People like George Bernard Shaw, who said under socialism, you'll be forcibly fed, clothed, taught, whether you like it or not. And if you're not deemed worthy, if you don't have the character, according to George Bernard Shaw, the big Fabian socialist, you'll be executed. Then you've got people like Carol Quigley. Then you have people like Carol Quigley who were insiders in those Cecil Rhodes roundtable groups who, again, were pushing for collectivism in the different Western nations across the planet and the other developing world nations. And he talked about how there's no more political freedom, how the left and right is all an illusion, but then specifically how you're going to be numbered from birth to death, tracked through your military and education records, and all the way down to your retirement benefits and then to your death itself. They're going to control your life literally from cradle to grave. And it talks about how the experts are going to rule us instead of the people, instead of the popular will, instead of anything that even remotely resembles a democratic process. But look how updated this is in the 21st century with people like Bill Gates, big technocrats trying to tell us how it is, trying to tell us how to run our lives, trying to tell us we're not supposed to use water or energy and that we need to cut our population. And now he wants to use these high-tech gadgets to make sure the vaccines and big pharma medication is taken. That's the socialist collectivist model they've got us all to adopt. And it doesn't have anything just to do with socialist sentiment. This has to do with big state governments. It's the same thing for the capitalist branded stuff. It's the same thing for the fascist branded countries. Nazism was National Socialism, another brand of the same thing. It's tyranny. It's tyranny, people, and Bill Gates is part of it. I wholeheartedly reject these proposals. They really make me uneasy. Meanwhile, in food and natural news information, we have the corrupt Indian politicians who've been accused of stealing more than $14.5 billion in food that was specifically designated for the many starving poor in India. Apparently, corrupt Indian politicians have successfully stolen more than $14.5 billion worth of food from poverty-stricken citizens, looting over 57,000 tons of food intended for the starving poor. These corrupt lawmakers and politicians have put into warehouse massive amounts of food supplies that they're holding for purposes unknown. Now, Naresh Saxena, a Supreme Court commissioner there in India, called this the most mean-spirited, ruthlessly executed corruption because it hits the poorest and most vulnerable in society. What I find even more shocking, she says, is the lacking willingness in trying to stop it. And all this warehousing of food, controlling of the food supply, not only is it part of totally historical tyranny, just as we saw in places like the French Revolution, just been reading about that, that's why it's on my mind, but this is at a time where we have a drought. Who knows what all are the major causes behind one of the biggest droughts we've ever seen, but it's crimping on the food supply. We've got these crazy carbon policies where they're growing corn for ethanol for fuel production rather than for food, all this cutting into it as there's finally, for the first time, a debate over speculating on commodities, in particular food, which really gives a financial incentive to do just what they've done with this poor food stock in India, to warehouse the food and bet on its price going up in the future. Very dangerous policies that we're seeing in this day and age, all of it putting major pressure on the global food supply, really probably so they could just call for greater population controls, but it's going to hit the poorest first. And these policies, Lord Monckton has come on and analyzed the data and shared it with us, are affecting over 1 billion people. There's 1 billion people on the edge of starvation just through policies like ethanol for food, just through policies like ethanol for fuel rather than for food. Now, on the GMO food front, we have the headline in Natural News: doctors and farmers find that eliminating GMOs prevents disease. Sounds like a no-brainer, but a lot of people don't know this. We need to make sure we're educating people, particularly those in lower income brackets who have a financial incentive not to pay for the costlier foods, to seek out whatever's cheaply available, or those processed foods that are ready to go at the biggest supermarkets contain some of the most dangerous foods. Now, in the most recent years, more and more doctors have started warning their patients to avoid genetically modified foods, and the results are paying off. It cites Jeffrey Smith, probably the leading expert in GMOs, by the way, who's telling us that thousands of doctors have reported the elimination of disease when patients simply cut their intake of genetically modified foods from their diets. It's an elimination of things like immune disorders, arthritis, diarrhea, irritable bowel syndrome, allergies, skin problems, general pain, migraines, restless leg syndrome, and on and on and on. And you can get these results pretty quickly if you just cut the genetically modified foods from your diet. There's something going on there. They don't work well with the body. The body isn't used to recognizing these things, even if in theory they provide some benefit. In reality, they're hurting people. And again, we see the same evidence, not from doctors who deal with humans, but from farmers raising their livestock. As you know, in many places around the world, livestock, whether it be pigs, cows, horses, sheep, have been dying en masse, having spontaneous abortions, having other health issues because they're eating the genetically modified food commodities. Now, the elimination of disease by dropping genetically modified foods has been found in farmers, as I mentioned. Jeffrey Smith points out a Danish farmer who switched to non-GMO soy for his 450 pigs and their offspring. Within 2 days, only 2 days of cutting this diet, the animals' diarrhea problems virtually disappeared, and furthermore, during the following year, after taking them simply off of the GMO foods, the deaths that he had seen in his population of pigs from ulcers and bloating and other complications had vanished. He had up to 36 pigs from his larger 450 or so pigs dying from these kind of complications, but a simple change in the diet changed all that. Now, that should be suggestible to those of you who haven't began avoiding GMOs. I've tried to cut it out completely from my diet, and I'm going to continue to do so, but we need to, once again, warn others.